Hi, my name's Gabe Knuth, and I'm a senior end user computing analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group. And today I'm going to have a fireside chat with Fred Chavez from DXC about how IT environments are becoming more complex and how desktop virtualization can be used to address the concerns that are driving that complexity. Fred, thanks for joining. Tell us a little about yourself and what your role is at DXC.
Thanks, Gabe. I am DXC's Global Virtual Desktop and Application Services Offering Manager. I basically run DXC's VDI practice.
Okay. So that means that you have a lot of stories from the past 3 years, probably from beyond that. Going back further.
Yeah, DXC really got heavily into the VDI space, the VDI paradigm, back in 2005, 2006, and we've been doing it ever since.
Gotcha. Well, over the last 3 years, and since the pandemic started, not we've seen a lot of change and a lot of change among EUC about how organizations are handling things like remote work and security and things like that. And those are two of the driving factors behind IT complexity. Interestingly enough, we also see, as part of our research that we do here at Enterprise Strategy Group, we also see that the number of devices out there are are multiplying on a per user per day kind of basis,
Right.
and all of these things are just they are the main reasons why IT departments report that things are more complex than they were just 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's always been the endpoint complexity, that endpoint problem, trying to figure out what you're going to do with your endpoints, how you're going to manage them, chasing patches. Patch Tuesday was always an event and all that sort of thing. And then the pandemic came along and it just exacerbated that problem because now it's not as if you have all of your devices inside one building. Now they're spread out different places, coffee shops, home offices, that sort of thing. And when you have that scenario, it becomes much more difficult to ensure that that device has got patched, that device has got the updates it needs, and that it's security compliant, right? So that definitely adds that complexity. There's always been the problem of managing um, endpoints around like integration, mergers and acquisitions, gig work folks, contractors, all that kind of stuff has always been there. And But now with the pandemic, it's really just exploded. And even though we hear all of these calls about a return to work, we're really not seeing that much of that. We're seeing some of it here and there, but for the most part, a lot of staff, a lot of employees have really seen work from home as a benefit to their overall lifestyle, to their overall user experience, to their overall work and job satisfaction. If someone can work from home and save on gas, save on sometimes childcare, save on just the amount of time in the commute, they think of that as an upgrade, as a benefit. And if you start to try to take that away, then you're taking away benefits. And so, employers are now facing that complexity, as you said, to manage all that. At the same time, you can't really crawl it back.
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying, we've got there's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of media out there that's saying that you can't turn on CNN or anything and find without finding some sort of article that says, "Oh, Twitter's making everybody come back to the office," or whatever the case may be. And there are a lot of return to office efforts out there, but very few companies in the research that I've conducted have said that they are 100% back at the office.
Oh,
Um,
right.
and, and in fact, the 58% in some recent research, I just pulled up the stat, 58% said that up to a quarter of their workers were remote most of the time. Um,
Yeah.
and so I look at it as, regardless of whether most of your employees work remotely or most of them work in the office, a lot of these are like these hybrid workers now where they have to come into the office a couple of days a week, but they can work home a few days a week too. As long as you have workers at home, or not just at home, but anywhere outside of the office, you still have to have then a hybrid or remote work strategy as part of your
Right.
overall EUC strategy. And so while it may not be 100% of the users 100% of the time, it's still a very real problem that has to be addressed. And that means that one of the challenges here is that users have to be equally productive and have equal access to their apps and desktops and data, regardless of where they are. And you can't have an inequity there. They can't be like less productive at home, but we're okay with that. We want to make sure that they're as productive at home as they are in the office, or as you say, in the coffee shop, that kind of a thing.
Right.
It also doesn't just align with productivity, right? We need to make sure that they can do this from any device, because we also have data that shows that users actually work from what's the data? 70% of users conduct work from 4 or more devices on a daily basis. So we need them to have equal footing regardless of device, not just location. Plus, we have to do that securely.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If you have any device that's out of the office, even 1 day a week, that's a remote worker. You can't just roll the dice and hope that, well, that device isn't going to go missing. That device isn't going to get hacked into. That device is always going to be perfectly safe. You have to consider that device as a remote device. And I think that's the key piece, that VDI solves all of these problems.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I always look at it like the more devices you have, the larger the security footprint, which
Yep.
maybe if your IT staff is gigantic, you can manage that. But odds are that becomes a problem at some point. And so, um, adopting a strategy where we care a little bit less about the endpoints because we're not putting our data on them, we're not putting our apps on them, we're just allowing them access remotely to that information and to those apps. That helps deal with security. It enables that remote work from anywhere you want to be. You kind of don't care about the number of devices. That
Right.
helps streamline IT operations and so on. And so that's sort of the major industry trend that I see kind of coming out of this. As we're now at the 3 years post the initial reaction to everything, and so this
Yeah.
is kind of how things have settled out, right? None of this is probably super news to anybody that's watching. We're all kind of living through the same the same constraints these days. Um, but what's interesting is I can't count the number of times that I've had discussions with people introducing the idea of desktop virtualization over the last 3 years. It's just been my life for 20 years. So, and yours
Yeah.
too, you mentioned DXC's been doing this since 2005. Um, the it's been our lives for so long, it was just kind of taking it for granted. But then all of a sudden, these new use cases have presented themselves, and so we realized desktop virtualization is solving all these problems for people that didn't even know they had these problems before.
Right.
Um, and so, how's your business changed over this time? I would imagine it's
Well,
orders of magnitude
yeah,
different than it was 5 years ago.
we what we're seeing now, in the past there was this uh sort of this line, this border line where employers or our clients would say, well, I'm not ready to go to VDI because it was full on, everybody's on VDI or everybody's not on VDI. What we're seeing now is much more of I need to provide some VDI capability because I have all these problems, and these problems are worse when my machines are far away, when they're out of the office, when they're out of network. It's and that eventually turns into, hey, this is way easier and way less expensive than managing physical devices. I mean, setting aside the fact that uh, when you have a repurposed physical device that's been sitting there for 3 or 4 years for regular use, that device is done. As part of a VDI connection method, as a thin client type device, that's barely, it's not even half of its usable life at that point. And so you end up with a lower carbon emissions. You don't have to buy new devices. You have a sustainability play there, and they consume much less power. There's not a lot of spinning disk that has to happen there. There's not a lot of compute that has to happen on that end. It's all happening in the back end in the data center, where there's highly efficient, specialized cooling and power distribution and all of those elements that help in the sustainability place. But so eventually, a lot of our clients say, yeah, I think we're going to move more and more people to this VDI paradigm. And when they do, they find that, of course, it's much easier to patch all of the desktops when they're all in one location. And in many cases, our designs allow for instant updates. Users don't even know. There's no downtime. There's no please save your work because you're getting this new update that you didn't get because you weren't powered on or logged into the network. All of that stuff goes away. They just log in and got basically a new OS. Or even from Windows 10 to 11, we can easily make that transition now with a virtual desktop paradigm. Or somebody was working on Windows 10, they come in the next day, the Windows 11, they barely notice. So it does make that complexity simpler.
Yeah, and I mean, right, log out Monday with Windows 10, log in Tuesday, you have Windows 11. Or log
Yeah,
out Monday with, one version of Chrome, log in Tuesday with a new version of Chrome or whatever.
right. No migration, no headaches around that piece. And back to your security point earlier, all of this happens where the users are anywhere, right? It doesn't matter now if that device that user has breaks, gets coffee spilled on it, gets taken. There's nothing on it. The worst they could do is boot up and get a login screen. And unless they've got credentials, that's not going to get in. And they would have to have those credentials right away, because as soon as that user reports that there's a problem, that machine's disabled. It's not going to get in. So there's a lot of benefit from a security perspective, but that same centralization that keeps the data secure also keeps performance high. If you have your desktops right next to the server that has all your data, which is right next to the app server that has some key high demand apps, then everything is right there. Very high speed backplane, and users find that it's much more performant for them if it's set up correctly.
Right. Yeah, I call that app co-location, and that's there's lots of use cases for that. And that's really been a long time use case for all kinds of desktop virtualization was, even when we were talking about deploying it in-house before remote work became a thing, by being able to place the application closer to the data, closer to the, whatever the files or the database or whatever, the application backend, you could make the application perform better. Nowadays, that's even more important when we're talking about users
Right.
being more spread out. Um, and that's really the idea is you can deliver any app or the full desktop to endpoint devices without having to install the app on those devices, without having to ship data back and forth between them. I can't there's 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 so many stories about the initial reaction to COVID, where the things that people were doing when they couldn't get servers and they couldn't get PCs and desktops or laptops or whatever to take
Right.
home. That I mean, a neighbor of mine had a choice to either go and grab her she could go to the office, I should say, and get her PC and bring it home and VPN in, which of course that's not a sustainable solution. Or she could find a laptop and use a remote desktop connection to her PC at work. The problem with that solution is that the only laptop she had was a Vista era HP laptop that she called me
Mm,
at 1 o'clock in the morning. Was like, "Hey, how can I get this working?" And I'm like, "I don't know. That's a huge security risk." And all that did was VPN into the network too. So like, this way to do remote access is so much safer, so much better, so much more high performant than any of those crazy things that we had to do back in the day.
right.
And so delivering those apps or desktops to anybody without having to increase your security footprint. And in fact, being able to reduce it, because you can use any endpoint, even deploy thin clients, that kind of a thing if you wanted to. That helps ensure that consistent user experience in the office or outside the office, because the same solutions that you use for remote access, you can use when you're in the office too. And so it's the same experience wherever they happen to be, that preserves productivity, that simplifies the IT environment that IT has to manage, or the end user environment that IT has to manage, and much more.
It's an overwhelmingly better experience for users when they don't have to worry about how powerful their machine that they're typing on is. And it's an overwhelmingly better experience for IT organizations because they don't have to manage that thing. If it breaks, you can pick up a Chromebook. You could use a phone or a tablet. You could ship out a thin client very cheaply. You could have extras in your closets at in the office. Just swap it out, and everything is back to normal in moments, as opposed to having to wait to have your machine fixed or have a new device sent out to you. You can just go down to your local box store and pick up something super cheap, and it's going to perform as good as the last thing that you had.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the kind of thing that too that we have data to back a lot of this stuff up. And in fact, the one data point I pulled out and made super bold in my notes here is that we checked late last year. 5% of organizations were using desktop virtualization for more than 75% of their desktops. But by
Yeah.
2026, 38% of organizations expect to use it at that same scale. So by then, more than a third of organizations that we had surveyed said that they were going to be using desktop virtualization at massive scales.
Right. And with cloud compute now becoming much less scary, right? Much more ubiquitous, then your cost of entry, which used to be really the big barrier for VDI, you have to buy a bunch of boxes, buy a bunch of servers, set them up in your data center, all of that stuff. Now that's lowered significantly, and you can go in with minimal compute, and with the technology that we employ, you can take machines and instantly, on demand, intelligently create them, destroy them, so that you're not paying consumption charges while nobody's using a device. And there's really smart ways to do things, and we think that really helps the VDI story along. It always had its great use cases, mergers and acquisitions I talked about before, contract workers, temporary projects. If you had a device that broke and you just need something while it's getting repaired, you can use VDI. That'll get you by. DR scenarios, you have a scenario where people can't get into the office. Well, you set up a bunch of, maybe there's a flood, maybe there's something going on, hurricane watch. Well, the data center is fine, but you can't go into the office. Well, instead of having to VPN and deal with all of that, VDI can be used as a good backup for that sort of thing. And so all of those things have always been there, but now with the technology to really manage as aggressively as you want, manage your cloud consumption, now that barrier to entry is very, very low, and a lot of clients are taking advantage of it. We're seeing clients who are putting, obviously we've got the 20, 30, 80,000 seat implementations. That's sort of the norm. But we're seeing 5,000, under 500, right? 150 user implementations using cloud, which is fine. Many of our clients have a lot of different restraints and constrictions on what they can do and where they can do it, but VDI fits in all of those spaces.
Okay, well, yeah, exactly. And so before we get into talking more about what DXC and Dell are doing here, VDI, if you want to deploy your own VDI environment and you're not familiar with it, and this takes, it's not for the faint of heart, right? It takes a lot of skills and it takes a big expense.
Yeah, well, certainly there's expense there, but the reason VDI is expensive is because everybody, no matter who you are, you're going to make mistakes. We made all of those back in 2006, right? 2005, we thought we could do it. 2006, we learned that we didn't know enough, but then we figured out how to do it. If you are starting your VDI journey, you definitely want to engage with partners that have done it, have understood it, and have a lot of experience with it. We have over 1 million seats under management globally. We've made those mistakes. We have the scars from the problems that have happened. But if you're starting on your own, yeah, it can be pricey, especially when you have to rebuild, restart, redo a bunch of the work that you had just spent months doing.
Well, and there's the benefits of like cloud, or just not even cloud, but just as a service consumption models and things like that. And because, if you wanted to deploy 1,000 users worth of VDI from nothing on-prem, you've got to go buy 1,000 users worth of VDI infrastructure and hardware and have the
You
people that know how to build and implement that. Or that's where managed services from DXC come in. That's where consumption-based pricing models via cloud or Dell or that kind of thing come in. And that's kind of what I'm
Absolutely.
learning.
The difference between, at least from a cost perspective, from a consumption perspective, between on-prem compute, particularly for VDI, and cloud compute for VDI, that gap has narrowed so much that you really can't tell the difference anymore. I can get GPU acceleration on-prem as a consumption model. I can get regular VDI users on-prem. It's it's quite amazing what has happened in that space. With Dell now, with Dell's consumption-based pricing and model that we've partnered with them on, we can do VDI on-prem with no hardware commitment, no term commitments, scale up, scale down as much as you want. Because we're so large and because Dell is so flexible, we're able to bring virtually, no pun intended, a cloud type experience for consumption with an on-prem scenario. It's really pretty cool.
And that allows you can increase employee productivity and collaboration, ensuring that kind of across the board, because that's one of the main challenges, broadly speaking, in end user computing today. Not just that's actually one of the things that desktop virtualization helps, is employee productivity and collaboration, but that also helps reduce costs through shared resources, right? Instead of buying all these machines for each person.
Yeah, I'll give you an extreme example, but it applies to all use cases. Engineering high-end CAD, graphics, GPU type consumption. Classically, I have a team of 500 engineers. Let's just call it 1,000 for math's sake. I've got 1,000 different desktops that have very, very high-end compute in them. Lots of memory, lots of CPU, and definitely lots of GPU, right? But these folks still have to do their email. They still have to write reports. They're still working on spreadsheets. They're still doing other things. There's a lot of web-based apps that they're accessing, and they're not using that high-end compute all the time. And in some cases, we've seen that that it falls into three categories: about 20% of the day for some, about 50% of the day for most, and really there's a small amount that are doing high-end GPU 80% of the time, 85% of the time. Those folks, maybe you want to give them a high-end machine, but in any case, you can give that entire environment, that entire 1,000 users, 500, 600 high-end VDI experiences or desktops or apps hosting. And when you do that, then as they use it and free it up, somebody else uses it and then they free it up. And suddenly you're not buying 1,000 high-end boxes. You're buying the equivalent of 400 or 500, maybe 600. So you're already at a 30, 40% savings on just the cost of what that would take. These users have a great experience because now they've got much more powerful machines than they would have had on their desk. They're not old. They get refreshed more often. If somebody needs has a special need, they've got some special project or some high intensity piece that they're working on, we can easily bump up their compute temporarily or permanently, if that's the case, without any hassle. They don't have to go through procurement. They don't have to order a new thing. There's no setup. There's no reinstall of software. You just say, hey, you now have all 96 cores available to you now. And by the way, a
Right.
couple terabytes of memory, and sure, 48 gigs of GPU memory.
Yeah,
So they can do anything on those.
Yeah, well, and so yeah, delivering those high-end workloads to remote users, that's obviously a big point. But then, when those users aren't there, all the other users have
Yeah,
unlimited.
exactly. That's a shared resource, even though we manage it intelligently. Users don't realize that it's a shared resource, and it doesn't matter to them. It's their VDI. using the personalization technologies that we use. They get the experience of having their own machine, feels like it's their own machine, and really, for all intents and purposes, it is their own experience. It's their own machine, their own experience. But from an IT perspective, you're much more smart. You're much smarter about how you spend that compute dollar.
Okay, so we talk a lot about what the end user's experience is like here. How does this help with IT admin complexity too, or IT admin's day-to-day life? Because you got to figure by having this delivered as a managed service, this is going to take a lot off the plate of the IT admin.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, as a managed service, it's much easier. You know, more often than not, it's less expensive because we're very efficient at it, right? A good GSI is going to be very, very efficient at running the environment. So it's not something we have to throw bodies at. It's more something that we're putting technology and engineering. We're constantly developing in the back end better, smoother, faster, less expensive ways to do all of this management. But even the difference between a regular physical device versus VDI, there's savings there around chasing patches like we talked about before, managing updates. Instead of having, in my engineer scenario, that's 1,000 different images that somebody has to manage. In my scenario, that's one image with some different variation configurations that happen on the fly. From an IT management perspective, you get reports, you know what the environment's doing. You don't have to turn the knobs, flip the switches. Somebody's doing that and keeping everything running smoothly. And you're kept up to date with, like I said, reporting and dashboards and all the things that you need to be able to make strategic decisions around what to do with your environments and your dollar. But DXC is managing that.
There's so many things here that are very important. As we talked about very early on here, how this aligns with the top priorities for organizations, right? We've got security, employee productivity, and IT operations automation, optimization in IT operations.
Sure. And if I could jump in and say user experience and sustainability has definitely vectored upwards in our conversations with our clients. There's a lot of focus on user experience, much better with VDI, of course, and sustainability. That's a huge thing. And just being able to keep a device on a desk useful for 9 years as opposed to 4, that complete game changer.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting about sustainability, because that's also really high in the list these days, and increasing positions each year. If you just look at the top 10 list of priorities, it's on there and it's moving its way up. What's interesting about the sustainability this time around, because at first I was like, we've done this before. We change our logo to green for a month every year and we call it a day, right? There's actual meat on the bones this time around, and we've got data that shows that that vendors are investing in their ESG programs, and that customers are requiring their vendors to invest in ESG programs, environmental sustainability and governance, not enterprise strategy group. But so customers are investing, or vendors are investing. These customers require their vendors to invest in it, and customers are willing to pay more for solutions that demonstrate some sort of ESG program. And that tells me that there's real value in sustainability these days. So there's actual momentum in sustainability these days. And so that's really cool. And what a great kind of built-in message for VDI. You don't have to go out and buy new endpoints. You can repurpose what you have. And if you do need new endpoints, that's fine. We don't have to buy the crazy high-end ones. We can get by with something maybe a little bit lower.
Oh yeah, it's not even get by. You get a perfectly excellent experience with a low power, low carbon footprint thin client, or no carbon footprint repurposed machine that eliminates the shipping of new devices and the manufacturing of new devices and all those things.
Yeah, and done correctly, those repurposed machines can be managed all together still as pushed out configurations to them as repurposed thin clients and things like that too. So yeah, there's a lot of options there, and all of them are still preserving the employee productivity, collaboration, end user experience, IT management, all that stuff. We're progressing on all fronts, and kind of the rising
Absolutely.
tide lifts all
And
ships
a
to
lot of it's just built
development.
in. You don't have to necessarily turn on the eco button or the sustainability meter.
Right.
It's all just built in.
Yeah. Like my car, when I push the eco button and all of a sudden it doesn't run that well. Uh,
Right. That
right.
doesn't happen. VDI is automatically that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it runs great. It doesn't, we don't have an eco mode. It just is awesome. And it comes with the eco stuff.
Yeah.
Um, okay. So as we kind of wind this up, my key takeaway here these days is that like employee experience or employee productivity has is on the line these days, right? Because the users can be anywhere and we want to make sure that they're productive from everywhere. And frankly, as a lifelong VDI person, I love that desktop virtualization is around to help everybody be able to work from wherever they want. It's, up to the challenge that we've been talking about for all these years. Um, I feel like it's never been more important to consider time to value when it comes to deploying a desktop virtualization solution. I feel like the data is overwhelming. We know that the industry is going this direction. That the desktop virtualization is an important component of just about every remote work or hybrid work strategy. Um, but there's no time to get to learn it all from scratch and get your scars, as you were talking about before, right? And so if you want to incorporate that as part of your EUC strategy, now's the time to get moving. And that's where like a managed service like what we've been talking about can really help. Like
Absolutely.
you mentioned too, there's no upfront costs. You can pay as you go, as with this consumable model, both the
Absolutely.
service and the hardware from Dell. And you, I can't say instantly, but it's much quicker than if you tried to do it on your own. You can have support for all your users, work locations, endpoint devices up and running
Right.
relatively
You get
quickly.
to cut out a big piece of that whole iterative process. It used to be that you'd have to first work out all this hardware, like you talked about, go through some POCs, try to reconfigure it. But now, to your point about almost instantaneous, we know what hardware, we've already pre selected a set of hardware that works in almost any scenario. So we just pick off the shelf the components that you need. We know the solution is already part of our stack. We know the software. We can just add it on there, and in as depending on what you're doing, in as little as a matter of a few weeks, you've got a running VDI environment, or it could be. Obviously, there's change control and security approvals and all those things that have to happen. But if everything is well coordinated, you're not waiting for a VDI solution to be built or to be architected or to be engineered. We already have that done.
Yeah, and it sounds like you get a lot more flexibility in terms of like virtual machine size,
Oh,
customizations, things like
absolutely.
that you would if you tried
Yeah.
to go just to a raw cloud solution where, you're buying a specific instance with a specific configuration that you don't always get to carve up. And so you get greater fidelity, a lot of flexibility because it could run in the cloud as well. But it could also run on-prem. And, at that point, you can carve up that host in any number of ways.
Yeah. And in the ways that fit as a business changes, we can modify those, we can mold that a little bit and make it so that it's a much better fit for whatever is happening at that time.
Well, there we go. So I think that's probably a pretty good place to land. I mean, like I said, it's while you could choose to do this stuff on your own, whatever you might save by doing that, it's gonna come at the expense of time to value, and unfortunately the employee productivity and things that you're trying to increase, right? By taking your lumps across the way. By
Right.
going to something like this, you can get there quicker, right? And you can start enjoying the benefits of desktop virtualization across the board, whether that's on-prem or in the cloud. And again, you get to leverage the experience that DXC has in all of, all the years that you've been doing this, plus all the stuff that Dell has been doing from a
Yeah.
hardware perspective, and honestly from a consumption pricing model perspective, because I think going to that as a service pricing model is one of the big reasons. Shifting those costs from capex to opex is one of the reasons that people choose to go to desktop virtualization
Yeah.
and DAS anyway. Um, and so by being able to adopt that model but keep the workloads on premises, man, I think it's a really cool opportunity for organizations.
Yeah, any one of those items, and you spin the wheel and you land on sustainability or you land on employee experience where they can just work whenever. If they have an emergency, they go, they come back, they do whatever, their work is still there. Land on cost optimization. If that wheel happens to land on efficient compute for high end users, or you land on flexibility, any one of those is a good enough reason to do VDI. The cool thing is that you get all of them just with it.
Yeah, I think
So
this is funny. This is like Fred and Gabe list the benefits of VDI. For, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. Spin the wheel. All these things are here, and they're available as like a package as a managed service from DXC Dell,
absolutely.
which is really great. So
Yeah.
this has been great, Fred. I appreciate
Yeah.
this.
Thanks.
What a great conversation. I hope this has helped people as they've listened or watched, and yeah, I hope we get to do this again sometime.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All
Thanks,
right,
Gabe.
thanks all for watching.